Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Pitt Season 1, Episode 11. It's called 5 p.m. So spoilers for the episode as always, and this is a Patreon sponsor review, so thank you very much to Allison for picking the show. So obviously this one ends with a big cliffhanger moment. Once again, we've had a few of those in a row actually. But this one's kind of the one that I've been waiting on, in that I was kind of expecting some kind of event, some kind of like crisis, like not something that's just a specific patient, but something that would be on the news, something where multiple injured people might be coming to the hospital. Maybe some kind of, I think, when I don't know if I ever said any of these in prior reviews, but something like some sort of big pile up in the highway, or maybe an explosion that had lots of victims or something like that. What we land on, though, and possibly connecting to a plotline we've had since all the way back in episode 1, is some kind of active shooting scenario at the concert that Robbie's kind of stepson's at. I think in the past I just assumed that was actually his son, but he clarifies in this episode it's kind of like a stepson, but he's broken up with the mother, but he's still close with him, which actually explained how I think it's Jake's the name of the kid, the teenager. He calls him man at one point in the phone call, and I thought that's a weird way to talk to your dad. And then but the explanation later on kind of explained that. So I was like, okay, fair enough. They're just kind of close. There's like a sort of surrogate father-son thing happening here, and that's very nice. It's sweet. It's all those things. But that's the big cliffhanger at the end. Is just the news breaking? Like both Dana and Robbie get calls or texts about this happening as kind of their first sign that there's going to be incoming patients, presumably from this incident. All hands on deck, which is a very bad bit of timing, not just because their shift is almost over, but because by this point in the episode, not only has Langdon been sent home from the previous episode, but Collins has been sent home. And that was a ballsy move on Robbie's part, even though you understand why he's doing it. He sees that Collins is struggling, he finds out this episode what she's just went through, and they share an intimate moment together, and she kind of all but confirms that she actually got pregnant with him some time ago, but chose not to have the baby, which is maybe adding a little bit to perhaps some guilt she's feeling right now. And, he never outright asks, are you talking about me? But you can tell by the look on his face, he's kind of heavily suspecting at the very least that she means him, and kind of lets her off the hook for it in kind of a third person way. It's a nice scene. It's a good moment, and he says, hey, go home, the shift's almost over. But it's ballsy because by this point in the episode, a lot of the episode focused on how short-staffed they've been, because Robbie specifically is being pulled between two serious cases at the same time. There's two operating rooms, and he has been asked to go to the other one while he's got his hands full in one, literally in a particular case. And one's like it's a mother who's a bit older, whose liver's failing, and she ultimately is going to transplant. And they do save her in the end, and she has to wait for a transplant. But it's touch and go. They're draining blood. They're inflating something to go inside her. Mackay is the one really tackling that. And in the other room, we've got a pregnancy, which is coming very suddenly, so they don't have time to move her up to the delivery ward. So they're just doing it here in the emergency room. And there's some complications along the way, and I liked how this one kind of bounced between serious and kind of light and funny. Like, the fact that it was like two dads and like the woman was a surrogate mother was amusing at first, because it led to just lots of little weird like sort of ways they're interacting, and kind of references to one of the dads is like best friends with her because they both work at the same school, I think they said, and there's kind of some sweet camaraderie there. And everyone's reaction to there being two dads is kind of nice, and everyone kind of takes it, in a very pleasant way. No one's bad about it or mean about it or anything like that. So it's kind of light and fun in some ways. But then when it does take a turn and it takes a turn twice, there's two like serious Jeopardy moments here. One is the baby not coming out cleanly and getting stuck. Like the shoulder gets stuck on the pelvis, I think they said. And the baby's very quiet when it does eventually come out. And that makes everyone concerned, and they're worried. So there's kind of like a hold your breath moment as you're waiting to see if like their quick techniques are going to make sure the baby's okay. And the baby does eventually start crying, and everyone breathes a sigh of relief. But there's a great bit of tension in there of whether or not the baby's made it or not. Because, and again, by this point, there's been so many complications of the baby coming out, and it's taken a long time, which I suppose is also, this is the perfect time to mention, they don't shy away from the visuals here. Like, whatever effect, you know, the prosthetics they made to show this off, we see a head crowning, we see a head coming through the vagina. It's, you know, the first time it cut to it, it was a bit of a shock, because you know, how many movies and TV shows have you watched where someone's giving birth, right? It's like such a common thing that in the rare occasion when they cut to a close up of just it actually happening, it's actually like a jump scare, and I had the jump scare accordingly. After that point, I kind of expected them to cut to it, so I wasn't as like shocked every time it happened. But still, they did not shy away, and especially when the baby was stuck and like Robbie's literally getting his hand in there and trying to, like, you know, help the baby out. It definitely was the most graphic pregnancy I have seen. Not the most shocking, because I am very much this, you know, I'm almost certain this was not real in the traditional sense. And what I mean by that is that there's a movie called No Blade of Grass from the 70s, in which there's a woman giving birth in a post-apocalypse, and the close-ups, not the rest of it, but the close-ups of the birth, which was a shocking shot in and of itself, is just straight up a real shot of someone giving birth. Like, they just went to like, you know, someone who was pregnant and said, hey, can we film that moment, just a close-up for a shot in our movie, and paid them, presumably, I imagine. But anyway, so, you know, like, I've seen, there's a real one in movies somewhere, but this is, as far as that aside, this is pretty graphic. So, know that going in. I guess it's not surprising given everything else we've seen in this show, but this was kind of maybe one of the most common medical things we hadn't seen yet, was a delivery. Which makes sense, because this is the emergency room. It's not really for delivering babies. By and large, they've got their own ward for that. They're expecting to go there. It's not as sudden or shocking as this perhaps is. But the other turn that I was getting to is after the baby's out, there's a problem with the mother, right? Where the placenta comes out, but then she's bleeding heavily and they have to try and fix her, and it becomes touch and go. And by this point, Robbie's left to go and help with the other crisis, and they're asking him to come back in because, hey, we've got more problems in here, and he can't because he's helping with this other thing. And you really feel this push and pull between the two rooms, and just how bad it is that Langdon, who seemed like arguably the I don't know, like, maybe not next in line per se, but it felt like Langdon was the one doing a lot of these surgeries, a lot of these like high tension surgeries. It felt like Langdon was the other one doing a lot of this stuff. So the fact that he's gone is really having Robbie be pulled from the two rooms. And like, I don't think we've seen Mackay in a surgery room this much most of the season. Most of the season she's been seeing the patients one-on-one and helping in that way. Seeing her in here do this, it kind of felt like, oh, she's kind of filling in because Langdon's not here. And she can, you know, she can do it. She knows what she's doing, but it doesn't feel, you get the sense that this is not something she does as often. It's not something she's is experienced in. So it does kind of feel like they need Robbie to come in and kind of supervise things. But I guess the big thing that was sticking out to me here is that there is a moment where they, you know, clearly they're starting to think this woman might die, right? This woman who's just given birth might not make it. And not only is that just tragic on its own, right? And it's tragic because she's good friends with at least one of these two dads. I mean, I'm sure the other one's friends as well by surrogacy, but, you know, pardon the pun there, I guess. But, you know, the idea that they're like best friends, so it's sad anyway. But there is this thing where, like, clearly this guy, one of the dads who's friends with her, he clearly starts to look just shockingly guilty during this. Because there's kind of this fear that if she dies because she gave birth, because there was complications from this birth, she did this for him. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure, you know, when there's complications and a mother dies during birth, and, you know, if the father's in the picture, I'm sure there's obviously guilt there too. But I think it's a little bit different when it's a surrogacy, because you have to go out of your way to ask for this favor. You have to, it's a big favor. It's a really big favor. And the idea that they could die from it, and you don't even see that coming, and then being like, oh god, especially when the kids survived. I mean, just imagine the dynamics of, like, mentally the strain of this. Like, 5 years from now, oh, my best friend died because we did this, but we've got this child, but there's also this guilt attached to the child. It's kind of a web, like a mess psychologically of to the point where you're like, oh god, I hope she makes it, just so that they don't have to like deal with this web of emotions that would be so difficult to sort of wade through. Now she does ultimately make it in the end, but there is like a moment or two where like it sounds like Robbie's getting concerned and he's saying, "Hey, stay with us," and the one of the dads is like sort of reminiscing with her because it might help her to like tell her some old stories, and it's a very well done scene. It's very very nail biting and intense. I guess the only critique I would give this plot line of like Robbie going between the two rooms is that I do think the other room is a lot less interesting and developed. It kind of feels like this is the main room where the main stuff is happening, and the other one's just there to be the other thing, to call him away and pull him between the two, as opposed to being as fully fleshed out on its own. It's not, which is not a big deal, to be fair. It's not a huge problem. The biggest thing that comes out of the other room with the mother is that when she does get stabilized and they've got tubing in her system and all that, and her daughter comes in and talks about how, oh, you know, she used to be a drug addict when I was, you know, before I was born, but she got clean as soon as she found out she was pregnant, but this is why her liver's in this condition. It's something going back to all that. And Mackay gets a little emotional looking, and Javadi like shoots her a glance, and it's kind of like a little moment of like, we all like, they understand kind of some weight to this, and that Mackay has also, you know, presumably in part gotten clean because she had a kid, and so on. So there's some relating to patients and things like that going on there. But yeah, the pregnancy and the two dads and all the close calls was definitely the more riveting of the two rooms, and gave it a lot more suspense. You know, one could argue maybe it's a touch too much suspense, where it almost feels a bit too TV-like by the time you have the second crisis happening in the same room. But it also feels like not unreasonable either. Like, I feel like this is exactly the sort of time where there would be like another problem afterwards, because, you know, the first problem kind of helps create the second problem, so it doesn't feel forced in that sense. So yeah, you know, so that main bit of drama from those two plots is good. And of course, on top of all this, Langdon keeps trying to call him. He calls his phone directly. He's calling the landline to talk to Dana, saying, "Hey, I need to speak to Robbie." So Langdon's desperately trying to like get back in touch and try and patch things up or deal with this or whatever, as Robbie is just getting more and more angry at these attempts because he's struggling to deal with this. Which I guess does lead us neatly into Langdon's absence and the fact that people are noticing that. Now, he tells Dana, because she's the one obviously moving everyone around, she needs to know that he's not here. And, you know, she doesn't necessarily ask for details, but Robbie does ask for like a list of everything he's done in the last few days, all the medication he's used, all the patients he's seen. So it sounds bad just from the insinuation. The others are sort of gossiping, and Dana tells him off for it, which I really enjoyed. I also enjoyed Santos revealing she could speak the same language as the other two ladies, and them like shitting a brick when they realized that some other person who like they weren't aware could hear them or understand them was been in the conversation the whole time. But Santos herself is kind of the interesting element here, because I talked a lot last time about how she ended up being right about Langdon, but until that moment came where he was confronted by Robbie and we saw the evidence ourselves, I was never really completely on her side. She always felt like she was not necessarily in the wrong in, you know, totality, but just in the sense that the way she was gunning for it, it felt like she was looking for something to fix. It feels like she, you know, was, you know, even if she was ultimately right, it felt like she was gunning for it in this really kind of, I don't know, this go-getter kind of way. And I think this episode made me feel really good about all my feelings before, because I think this episode confirms that I was still right to think all those things. Like, I think the reactions of the people in this episode, and even her herself, I really like. There's some multiple elements here. One is that, you know, she is told by Robbie, like, "Hey, don't tell anyone else about this. I've sent him home, but don't tell anyone else," and leave it at that. And immediately, she calls Garcia down. Now, partially you could say this is her, because she's just been told not to tell anyone, and she's also lied to Robbie that she hasn't told anyone, right? She calls Garcia down, and I think, okay, you could argue that she is just trying to cover the tracks here and tell her, "Hey, that thing I told you about earlier, I've just been told not to tell anyone else, so don't bring it up," or, you know, whatever, right? And that would be one thing. But to be honest, I don't really believe that's the sole reason she does this. I'm sure it's part of it, but I think part of this is really her wanting to tell her she's right, or she was right. Because, you know, her reaction when she told her in the previous episode was, hey, you're stirring shit up on your first day. And this was someone who Santos was getting along with quite well, and that was kind of the first blip. Even after she stabbed her in the foot with a scalpel, she was still kind of on board with Santos, and that was the moment that kind of made her go a bit cold on her. And it's kind of been patched up since then, and, you know, when she comes down, things seem friendly enough, and she's like, don't mind the foot, it's not a big deal. But then Santos has to bring this up and says, hey, that thing I talked to you about Langdon, hey, I need to talk about that. You know, she has to tell her, hey, he's been sent home. And she's like, what do you mean sent home? He's been dismissed. And ultimately says, yeah, he was still in meds, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, the reaction Santos gets here is probably not what she was looking for, not what she was hoping for, because Garcia just, like, says, you're trouble, and looks kind of mortified, and kind of seems concerned that they're down a doctor when everything's as busy and as hectic as it is. And up until this point, we've seen the evidence that, yeah, they are now understaffed. They were already, like, darting around, and everything was all hectic and chaos, and plates were spinning all over the place. But now it's even worse. And Santos immediately, you know, feels bad. And I think that this reaction was like, okay, this kind of lines up with how I was looking at Santos before, even though she turned out to be right? Which I guess what I'm saying here is I really like how layered it is, and there's a bit more nuance, where it's not just like, oh, she was right, so it justifies every way she acted up until that point. No, she was right, but maybe it still wasn't necessarily the right thing to do in every sense. And to the point where she starts to feel that after this reaction and tries to apologize to Robbie, and kind of admits that she's not sure. You know, she basically looks around and says, it doesn't feel like I did the right thing. Maybe because everyone's understaffed, and also because of the reaction she's got, now that she says that to Robbie, because she's not supposed to have told anyone. And Robbie says, look, some people would have turned a blind eye. You didn't. That means a strong moral compass. You objectively did the right thing. And I think Robbie isn't lying here. I think he believes that, and I think he sees the value in what Santos is found out and turned into him. But at the same time, there is kind of this sense of he was operating at his job seemingly without issue. There was no problems with his work throughout the day, and now everyone's struggling because he's not here. And it does kind of feel like, you know, she's so eager to prove herself on her first day, because that's the other thing that Garcia says, oh, you've done all this on your first day, no less. It's, you know, it kind of points out just that she's like trying to speed run success, that she's kind of like leaving nothing in her wake as a result, and there's no consideration for the fallout of what she's doing in any way. And I think this subject of like what is like the letter of the law and what is the right thing to do morally is something that's being questioned a little bit throughout this show, and certainly in this episode. There's also the plot in this episode with Samira and the morphine addict who is like trying to lie his way into getting some more morphine, and she gives him kind of like a medication that's for opioid addicts and lies to him, well, or bends the truth, shall we say. And Whittaker kind of asks about this because he's with her during this plot and says, hey, well, you know, like, isn't that technically, you know, is that the right thing to do? And she's like, hey, you know, yeah, it's do no harm, but then to a point, but then you have to do what's best for the patient, kind of thing. And I thought that was interesting as well, because when Robbie finds out about this and chews her out for it and says, you should have come to me and seen me, and she quite rightly says, you were very busy. And he was. We were watching him be pulled between two rooms. He had no time for another thing. Absolutely none. I think it's really interesting having Whittaker stand there and watch all this. And I think it's a nice contrast to what's went on with Santos and Langdon, because Whittaker's with Samira this episode. Samira does something a little off the book and gives her reason for it. You know, Whittaker says, hey, is that the right thing to do? You know, he just asks about it in a very genuine way, and he gets an honest answer from Samira, who explains her reasoning and says, you know, no, actually you can recognize the signs, he's addicted, this is the game plan, this is what we're going to do. And sort of, whether you agree with her or not, she does her best and gives her reasons for the choices that she has made. And then when she's chewed out for it, Whittaker's also there to witness that. He's there to see her get told off for this. but he's heard her reasoning. He's also seen it kind of work, where this guy's symptoms have went down, and it's all about pushing him to admit that he's got a problem so they can maybe take the next steps. Whereas Robbie, once he finds out, comes in and just kind of says, oh, you were lied to, you were given this thing that's for opioid addicts, that's what you are, and pulls no punches, just says it very bluntly. And this guy gets mad, he says F you to Samira and acts like a dick, and, you know, says he doesn't want any help, blah, blah, blah. And Samira opens up about her personal life a little bit and says her dad died of something similar to this back when she was a kid, and, you know, that's it. I think Whittaker being there is kind of this, like, naive witness for all this. You know, kind of like we, the audience, are, because we're not in this world. You know, we're new to this, even more so than the student doctors are. But him being there to be a witness for this and hearing her reasonings, seeing Robbie's reasonings for why she did something wrong, and then kind of seeing his face, and congratulations to the performance from the actor here. What's his name here? Garen Howell. I think he really sells this idea of sympathizing with Samira's side of this, even though, and he doesn't want to rub it in, he doesn't want to say, hey, you did something wrong and you got chewed out for it, I was right to question you, which is very different to Santos's reaction when she suspected someone was bending a rule for some reason. Now, I'm not saying that equal rule breaking between Samira and Langdon, I'm not saying that at all. Obviously there's degrees to this, there's levels to this. But I think it's very interesting just to compare these plot lines and compare, one, how open one is about it, and also how Whittaker tries to tackle it and how he sort of just tries to understand why it's happening and what the unwritten rules are that maybe happen in the ER that aren't taught to you in med school, that aren't taught to you until you're in there. And you're like, yeah, this is the rule in the book, but hey, this is what we actually all do because it just makes way more sense. Or this is the right, you know, sometimes certain patients require a different tactic, and you learn that on the job as opposed to what's in the book. So I thought that was... It was interesting as well, because we've had several plot lines now about characters, especially the student doctors, not being very good at talking to the patients. And I think it's interesting that Samira is typically very good at that, and she was doing very good at that with this guy, until Robbie didn't let her away with the lie anymore and kind of spilled the beans. Once that happened, obviously it turned very sour. But it's very interesting that she was doing it kind of like a symphony, right? She knows how to work with the patient, she knows how to make them feel a certain way and dance around the subject to a point. Almost to the degree where I almost wonder if getting her involved in the... You know how Mackay had the plot over the last couple episodes with the girl who might have been in sex trafficking, but they couldn't get her to admit it? I'm almost looking at this plot and thinking, you know, Samira is very good at making the patients feel comfortable. Maybe she's the one who should have been pulled into that plot a bit more. I mean, I think she was in that plot, if I remember correctly, but I do wonder if, like, she, like, maybe could have been the one left to talk to the patient, because it was definitely Mackay who was in the room with her and trying to, like, give her the leaflet and really trying to, like, open up to her. That was all Mackay, and I do wonder if Samira was the better candidate based on these other episodes. Again, even though this one kind of blew up in her face, but it wasn't. It was because someone else came in and put a stop to it. It wasn't necessarily because it was failing in and of itself. Maybe sometimes the rules should be bent because the rules that are there are archaic and need to be updated for some, and maybe written by people who actually work in the modern, you know, medical industry or something. Just a thought, ideas. So yeah, you've got, so that's going on, and I think some interesting fallout to that. Given how this episode ends, it wouldn't be surprising to me if everyone gets called back in, even Langdon, because they're so short-staffed and there's so many people to see and take care of. And then, of course, the tension on that Robbie's kind of son is at this event where there's a shooting happening. So I think all that stuff is building us up to some exciting, fallout and some tension over the next several episodes. The other thing to talk about here is Mackay. She has more of a plot with her ex and her son coming to stay with her. But more notably this episode, the dad's, like, girlfriend or partner shows up. And, you know, she is younger. It's so funny. Like, obviously, I was making fun of this guy last episode for, like, being jealous of Mateo and being like, is it because he's younger? And I'm just like, now that I've seen his girlfriend, I'm like, what is with the projecting? Like, you have a, like, they literally point out in this episode that his girlfriend's only about to turn 25, right? You know, she's a good 10 or so years younger than him. And he's giving Mackay shit for maybe thinking she's with a younger man. When she isn't, but it wouldn't matter. It's none of his business. But like he's just projecting. He's just worried that she's doing what he is. But yeah, we see this this interaction for the first time between them. There's some references to the restraining order between them. Mackay also threatens her at one point about, because she basically tries to like say, no, the son shouldn't go with her. She should stay with us. I'll step up and be more of a mum. And she says this, you know, not that exact wording, but she's basically saying all this right in front of Mackay. So Mackay confronts her in the staff lounge a little bit later and says, hey, don't get in between me and my son. I've been his mother for his entire life, and for all the mistakes I might have made, I've never been bad at that. And the girlfriend makes a snotty little comment about he needs stability. He loves living with us. And she's also wearing a shirt that says something about being a mum. I actually did not notice what it said until Mackay said, if you ever wear that shirt again, you know, and she doesn't finish, she basically just says you'll regret it, but she's basically threatened to beat the shit out of her if she ever wears that shirt again. I actually didn't really think about the shirt until she said that, so I wanted it to cut back to her so I could read the shirt, but then it never did. And I was like, damn it, you've just pointed the shirt out to me, and I never actually like took in what it said. It was something about being a mum or a mummy. World's best mum or something like that, but I never cut to the shirt again after she said that, because we never see that character again. That's the last time in the episode we've seen her. So yeah, I was like, god damn it, cut back to the shirt. I want to see what it says, but hey. So that's the episode. I guess the other thing to mention is that Dana is kind of getting emotional at the end, and is kind of ready to quit. She says that I think she thinks she's done. She don't think she can do it anymore. This just keeps getting worse, and if it's not her it'll happen to again, it'll happen to someone else, and she doesn't really think she can be around here. And there's a lot of talk about how they wouldn't know what to do without her. You know, she's so good at her job. As Mackay puts it at one point, she's never met a charge nurse who wasn't a stubborn bitch, her wording, and she means it in a nice way, but that's kind of the thing. But at the end she's kind of breaking down a little bit and saying she's ready to go, and Robbie's kind of excited. This is like right before they get the alerts and the phone call about the event. So now so yeah, a lot of stuff going on in this episode, really pushing everyone to their limits, which is nice. And obviously it sets up kind of like what the crisis is going to be for the back chunk of the season. It always felt like it was building to something like this, and I'm very curious, actually, thinking ahead to season 2, if they can pull off the same structure again. Like, would it feel too samey to do, like, you know, about 2/3 of the season just taking case by case, but then something big happens that's more of an event? It probably would feel too much the same. Like, do you start off with an event right at the start of the season and it's like an all-day thing? You know, I don't know what you do to shake it up, but I mean, building to an event like this and having it be this kind of shock thing, and obviously they'd been seeding this concert, this festival that Jake was going to, so that was set up, and we know that people are there that are related to these characters, so they've done all their seeding for it, to milk a bit of extra tension out of it beyond just there's a crisis and we have to all kind of put our heads down. But yeah, so you know, we'll see how that goes in the next few episodes. But thank you very much for joining me. You can of course support the show over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV or via YouTube membership. All support does help. Thanks to everyone who already does. And these will be coming a bit more frequently for the next little while, I believe. So look forward to the next Pitt review next week. So I'll see you guys for that. That'll do me though, so thank you very much once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?